has overtaken South Africa to become Africa's largest economy. The gross domestic product of Africa's top oil producer has been rebased. And for more on the story, we are now joined by economist from Standard Chartered Bank, Razia Khan, who is in London. Razia, just for our viewers out there, can you explain what rebasing means?
Sure, absolutely. The point to grasp is that economies are not static through time. The structure of economies change. For example, if you take South Africa itself, manufacturing used to have a much larger share of GDP than it does today. In Nigeria, of course, that economy has been through tremendous change, especially since the move to civilian rule in 1999. But its GDP figures had not been updated to reflect those new sectoral activities since 1990. So that was 24 years of outdated data that the Nigerians are now trying to compensate for.
All right, so now economists are out there already saying, and they're questioning this announcement, they're calling it meaningless, considering the last time the rebasing was done was 1990. Do you agree with these sentiments?
Well, emotions are always running very strong in Nigeria, and the point that most people have made is that they don't actually see the growth. The economy has been growing quite comfortably at 7% a year. We'll have to see what the rebased data suggests about that growth rate. It does now reveal a much larger overall GDP size, most of that, of course, being services. Now, the issue with that is if we're looking at Nigerian trade data or the size of Nigeria's financial services sector, that tends to compare less favorably with South Africa. But because so much of the GDP, over 51%, is now in services, we shouldn't necessarily expect that there are going to be metrics that allow us to compare the two. What we really have to do is dig deep into the survey data that was used as the basis for this GDP rebasing exercise. We've still got to see that.
All right, so as it stands, Nigeria has overtaken South Africa in terms of being the biggest economy in Africa. What are the implications of this for South Africa?
It's a huge opportunity for South Africa. For so long, South Africa was relatively isolated. It was by far the biggest economy in the region. Unlike a lot of Asian economies, for example, it didn't benefit from being in a growth neighborhood where everyone was growing rapidly and that those economies were substantial. The fact that we now think we've got a better idea of the size of the Nigerian economy is great news for South Africa because it means South African businesses, South Africa's financial services sector, these are very well placed to tap into that growth opportunity.
All right, so we know that there are Nigerians who live for $1 a day in Nigeria. That's 63% in 2011. Now, will this change, or does this mean that the inequality gap between the rich and the poor is set to widen?
Well, what it does mean is that whilst we previously thought average per capita income in Nigeria was around $1,700, now it's closer to $2,700. But if the number of people living on $1 a day hasn't changed very meaningfully, it means that the gap between the average and the median, what most people live on, is even greater. So in effect, it highlights a key issue, a key challenge for the Nigerian economy. So much more inequality as measured today with the GDP rebasing just became a much greater problem in Nigeria.
All right, so we know Nigeria's also made great strides within the telecom sector, but their biggest revenue actually comes from oil. Are you concerned at all that they haven't diversified at all?
Well, this is the exact issue that Nigerians are grappling with. On the one hand, you've got a rebasing of the GDP, which shows that it is more diversified overall. Manufacturing's share, for example, has gone up to 7% of GDP from 2% previously. But if you look at how the country earns its foreign exchange, if you look at how the country earns its fiscal revenue, oil still plays a very big role in both. And this is the challenge that Nigeria faces. If it is more diversified, surely these informal sectors should be brought into the formal sector. They should start making a more meaningful contribution to fiscal revenue. They should start making a more meaningful contribution perhaps to export growth. And if we don't see that, there's going to be a lot of people looking very closely at the Nigerian data, wondering how accurate a representation of reality it is.
Know more. ENCA.com